Hello and welcome to the in-depth series of Drishti IAS. My name is Pooja Dwivedi. Beside me is a still from the movie 12 Years a Slave. It is a 2013 movie. But you must be thinking, why do I have this picture beside me? Today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic: slavery, transatlantic slave trade, and Netherlands' role in the entire process. Because the Prime Minister of Netherlands, Mark Rutte, has apologized for the part the Dutch had played in the entire process. We are going to discuss it step by step from the perspective of GS Mains paper 2nd and 1st, and also from the perspective of prelims. Without any further ado, these are the many topics that we are going to discuss. First of all, let us see what is the backdrop, what is the background of the entire scenario, the scenario that we are discussing today. The Prime Minister of Netherlands, Mark Rutte, on Monday apologized for the country's historical role in slavery and slave trade. Although the members of the agreed communities, those who were apologized to, they say that it smacks of colonialist attitude because the speech was not followed by any sort of reparation. It was delivered without due consultation with the community, and that is the problem. We will discuss about it more in detail. Also, many have claimed an apology without reparation is of course not enough. So, let's talk about the transatlantic slave trade. Slave means a person who is compelled to work for another one without any compensation. As a human, we all should be ashamed that our past is spotted with this. See, the transatlantic slave trade began roughly in the 14th, 15th century. But the Portuguese, they became the first European powers to take significant part in African slave trade. There are many countries in Africa, such as Senegal, Sierra Leone, Congo, Angola, from which humans were transported to plantations in the Caribbean, in South America, and in the USA. They acquired slaves for labor on Atlantic and African island plantation, later for plantations in Brazil and the Caribbean, and they sent a very small number in to the European nations as well. First, how did they try to acquire slaves? First, they tried to acquire slaves by conducting raids. But sooner or later, they realized that first of all, it is very costly. And secondly, the military or the army of these particular nations of Africa were far better than the Portuguese army. So they thought, let's move on to another sort of arrangement. They started building relationship with the leaders of certain tribes, under which they acquired slaves from those tribes because they had an arrangement with the leaders and the leaders were given certain compensation. So this kind of relationship Portugal did. Portuguese, of course, they started becoming a monopolist in this particular trade. When they temporarily united with Spain in 1580, the Spanish broke up the Portuguese slave trade monopoly. The Spanish offered direct slave trading contracts to other European merchants. So contractors used to go in these countries, acquire human beings for them, and then trade it with the other countries. The Dutch started, or we can say, the Dutch developed a better system for that. That is the 𝐈𝐀𝐒 system. This is also a contract between the leader of the group of the tribes and the Dutch. This was like that, in which a common purpose could be served. Here, profits would go to the leaders of the tribe, and then the Dutch developed a relationship with the leaders through the help of 𝐈𝐀𝐒 system. Through the help of 𝐈𝐀𝐒 system, they acquired humans for slave trade. The Dutch took advantage of these contracts to compete with Portuguese and Spanish so that they could get direct access to African slaves. So you see, in this particular statement, Between 1615 and 1860, approximately 10 to 15 million enslaved people were transported from Western Africa to the Americas. Most were shipped to the West Indies, Central America and South America for different plantations such as tobacco, coffee, cotton, sugar, mining and rice. Through the slave trade, the current powers, the previous colonial powers, the current Netherlands, Portugal, then of course the French, British, they all became rich and richer because they did not have to pay anything in return for the services these slaves were giving, and they were freely, trading in these commodities, tobacco, that of course had the plantations in the Caribbean island in different regions of Americas. So they were trading and exporting these goods to different countries, and whatever profit they were getting, it was of course for them, and they did not have to pay anything to these slaves. Not only that, these slaves were also traded for domestic help. So a horrendous amount of exploitation was done with them. Moving ahead, now if we have to talk more about it, then of course by the 18th century, transatlantic slave trade reached its trafficking peak. The British were a monopolist at that period of time. Moving ahead, now see, what did Mark Rutte recently say? He was giving a speech in the National Archive in The Hague. He said, "We who live in today's world must acknowledge the evils of slavery in the clearest possible terms and condemn it as a crime against humanity, as a criminal system which caused untold number of people, untold sufferings that continue in the lives of people today. And we in the Netherlands must confront our part in that history." But there were no reparations. There was not any sort of talk about what the government would do to pay them back. United Nations Slavery and Remembrance website states the clear part of the Dutch in the entire slave trade. Between 1596 and 1829, the Dutch transported about 500,000 Africans across the Atlantic. Large numbers were taken to the small islands of Curaçao and St. Eustatius in the Caribbean. They also shipped about 500,000 Africans to their settlements in Dutch Guinea, notably Suriname, where they worked primarily on sugar plantation. Moving ahead, coffee, sugar, tobacco, these were the certain plantations where these slaves worked, apart from household labor in colonies. The centuries of slave trade funded what is known as Netherlands' golden age. It helped Netherlands grow in that period of time, that is corresponding roughly with 1585 to 1670. By 1814, more than 600,000 enslaved African women, men and children had been shipped to the American continent. Why we are discussing it? Because of course, history is not in watertight compartments. The current situation is the product of the previous circumstances. That is why it is important to talk about any sort of injustice that has happened. In Asia, between 660,000 and over 1 million people were traded within the areas under the authority of the Dutch East India Company. So, in Asia as well. When slavery was formally abolished in 1863, it was not the slaves who received any sort of compensation, but the slave owners. What was that, developed upon, that thought process? How it got produced, that slaves were not compensated, but the slave owners were. See, what else the government is doing? The government is currently in talks with Suriname, Aruba, Curaçao, Saint Martin, Bonaire, Saint Eustatius and Sabah to see what more can be done. The government will make 200 million euros available in a fund for measures aimed at raising awareness, fostering engagement and addressing the present day effects of slavery. What are the current effects of slavery? An independent commemoration committee has been proposed. This will be tasked with ensuring a large-scale dignified commemoration of the history of slavery on 1 July 2023. 150 years will be completed. Although the thing is that, although it was abolished in 1863, slavery, it took 10 years. That means it took 10 good years to actually implement it. and together with the Caribbean parts of the kingdom, Suriname and other countries, this will be done. July 2023 is going to be the 150th anniversary of abolition of slavery. School education system, although does not adequately talk about slave trade in the books, not only of Netherlands, but most of the schools in the UK and other such colonial powers. The country is also looking at returning artworks that were looted in the colonial, during the colonial period. That's a good move. See, there are also allegations with respect to the current system of slavery. In 2020, Drishti IAS, who was the representative back then to talk about slavery, he said that the self-image of tolerance was blocking the tackling of discrimination in the Netherlands. Like, there was a kind of self-vision by the Netherlands that we have a lot of tolerance for those who were erstwhile slaves or those who come from the blacks and people of color. But there is a systemic racism in the police force and other government services. Dual nationals, they have been unfairly treated and they are have been unfairly accused of child care benefit fraud. Migrants have in general been found to have lower levels of educational and professional success if we compare them to the white Dutch people. Okay, moving ahead, see what is the entire issue, why people are not happy with the apology of the Prime Minister? Because they were seeking apology from King Willem Alexander in the former colony of Suriname on July 1st, 2023. The process that was currently done, the apology was not done in due consultation. If you have hurt someone, okay, you might not realize that you have hurt someone because the tree, of course, feels when the axe is cutting it. Okay, but the axe does not feel that it is doing something wrong. So once you know what kind of actions you have done to hurt this person, if you have not consulted with that person, if you have not done any sort of consultation, how can you draft an apology? So communication has not been done. Yet others have criticized the fact that the apology has not been accompanied by any sort of reparation, that responsibility has been just, serviced by words. St. Martin Prime Minister has said that the island would not accept the government apology until our advisory committee has discussed it and we as a country have discussed it. Okay, so that's it for today. Okay, I will attach a question in the comment segment for you to answer. Let me take the names of those who have answered my last question correctly. So the correct answer was 2017. A lot of you have answered it correctly. Pramit, Guddu, Shirley, Suraj, Shweta, Archana, Alan Peter, Watam, Tannu, Nenika, Sachin, Faizan, Ravi, Srinivas, Anuj Singh, also Nobodeep, Harsh, Rohit, Sandeep, Sagarika, Guru Prasad, Simran, Hitesh, Nitish, also Kiran, Rachna, Tushar, Aditya, Neha, Sonia, also others include Priya, Puneet, Sri Lakshmi, Aman, Riya, Abhishek, Reena, Tushita, Harish, Kudikila, Mohan, Gopi, Divyanshu, Student of the Year 2022, Mohit Pandey, nice emoticon there, Sauravjeet, Manjeet, Komal, Shubham, Rehan, Himanshu, Unstoppables, Soumyadeep and VKS. Thank you so much for answering the last question and answer this question as well for you to get your names in the next segment. That's it and thank you so much for watching.